The execution chamber reeked of fear and ozone. Marcus Chen pushed his cleaning cart through the massive doors, the wheels squeaking against the polished black floor. He'd done this walk 17 times in the past month. 17 servants had knelt before Empress Zixthara, and 17 had never walked out. The Vorthak Empire stretched across 12 star systems, ruled with absolute cruelty by an alien race that viewed other species as nothing more than disposable tools. Their Empress stood 9 feet tall, with chitinous armor plating that gleamed like oil under the harsh lights. Her 4 arms ended in razor-sharp claws, and her compound eyes could track movement from any angle. Marcus had been assigned to the Imperial Palace 6 months ago when Earth surrendered to the Vorthak fleet. The humans had fought bravely, but their ships were no match for technology that could tear apart molecules with focused energy beams. Now, the survivors worked as servants, laborers, and worse throughout the Empire. The cleaning crew was considered the lowest rank among palace staff. They were invisible, expected to work in silence, and disappear when their betters approached. Marcus had learned to move like a ghost through the corridors, mopping floors and emptying waste containers, while avoiding eye contact with anyone who might decide his life had no value. Today felt different. The palace hummed with nervous energy. Word had spread through the servant quarters that Empress Zixthara was particularly angry. Her favorite pet, a creature from the melody system that sang in frequencies that pleased her alien ears, had died during the night. Someone would pay for this loss. Marcus entered the throne room where the massive alien sat on her crystalline seat. The throne itself was carved from a single piece of Catherian diamond, worth more than entire planets. Around the base lay the scattered remains of previous servants who had displeased her. "Bring me the head groundskeeper," the Empress commanded, her voice like grinding metal. Her translator device made the words understandable to human ears, but the hatred behind them needed no translation. 2 guards dragged in a trembling Andromedian, his blue skin pale with terror. Marcus had seen this alien tending to the palace gardens with careful precision. The creature was gentle, spending hours nurturing exotic plants from across the galaxy. "Your Majesty," the groundskeeper stammered, "I followed every protocol." The creature's environment was perfect. I checked the temperature, humidity, and silence. The Empress rose from her throne, towering over the kneeling servant. "My Melodian songbird is dead. Someone must answer for this failure." Marcus continued cleaning, trying to remain invisible. He'd learned that the Empress enjoyed having an audience for her executions, even if that audience was just the silent cleaning staff. She fed on fear, and the more witnesses to her power, the more satisfied she became. The groundskeeper's voice cracked as he pleaded, "Please, Majesty. I served faithfully for 3 years. I've never lost a creature before." Perhaps the animal was simply old, or the Empress's claws extended with a metallic scraping sound. "Are you suggesting that I, Zixthara the Undying, cannot properly care for my possessions? That my judgment in acquiring pets is flawed?" "No, Majesty, I would never." The execution was swift. One moment the groundskeeper knelt on the floor, the next his head rolled across the polished stone. Marcus forced himself to keep cleaning, though his hands shook as he wrung out the mop. The metallic smell of alien blood filled the air. "Dispose of this mess," the Empress commanded, settling back onto her throne. "And bring me the head of domestic staff. Someone else must answer for allowing incompetence in my palace." Marcus knew who that would be. Yira was a Centaurian female who managed the palace's internal operations with incredible efficiency. She'd been kind to him during his first weeks, explaining the complex hierarchy and helping him avoid the worst assignments. She didn't deserve to die for something completely beyond her control. The guards returned 20 minutes later, dragging Yira behind them. Her normally pristine uniform was torn, and one of her eyes was swollen shut from resisting arrest. She held her head high despite the circumstances. "Yira of Centaurus Prime," the Empress announced, "you are charged with negligence resulting in the death of Imperial property. How do you answer?" "I maintain all domestic operations within acceptable parameters, Your Majesty," Yira replied steadily. The pet quarters were cleaned according to schedule, fed proper nutrition, and maintained at optimal conditions. I cannot control natural biological processes. The Empress's compound eyes glittered with malevolent pleasure. You dare question my judgment? You suggest that my precious songbird died of natural causes rather than your incompetence? I suggest nothing, Majesty. I state facts. Marcus watched in horror as the Empress's fury grew. Yira's calm defiance was exactly the wrong response. The alien ruler demanded groveling, not logic. She wanted her servants to beg and plead, to acknowledge her absolute power over their lives. Then you die believing in your own adequacy. The Empress snarled. Her claws extended again. Gleaming in the throne room's harsh lighting, the execution was more brutal this time. The Empress took her time, enjoying Yira's pain before ending her life. Marcus felt sick to his stomach but forced himself to continue working. Stopping would only draw attention, and attention meant death. Bring me another, the Empress commanded when Yira's body finally stopped moving. I am not yet satisfied that the proper price has been paid. The pattern continued throughout the day. The head chef, executed for serving food, while the pet lay dying. The maintenance supervisor, killed for not preventing tragedy through supernatural foresight. A librarian who'd never even seen the pet quarters died simply because the Empress enjoyed the terror in his eyes. By evening, Marcus was the only servant left in the throne room. The others had fled to their quarters or found excuses to work in distant parts of the palace. Smart move. But Marcus couldn't leave. His assignment was to clean the throne room, and abandoning his post would mean certain death when discovered. The Empress sat brooding on her throne, surrounded by the bodies of her murdered servants. She'd killed 8 beings today, and Marcus could see she wasn't finished. Her compound eyes tracked his movement as he cleaned blood from the floor around her crystalline seat. Human, she said suddenly. Marcus froze. In 6 months of working in the palace, she'd never addressed him directly. He was beneath her notice. Just another piece of cleaning equipment that happened to be organic. Yes, Majesty? He kept his head down, not daring to meet her gaze. Approach the throne. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but there was nowhere to go. The throne room's doors were guarded, and even if he could escape the palace, the planet was controlled by Vorthak forces. He set down his mop and walked slowly toward the crystalline seat. The Empress studied him with her alien eyes. Up close, she was even more terrifying. Her chitinous armor was scarred from countless battles, and her claws bore stains that Marcus didn't want to identify. The translator device around her neck hummed softly as it processed her thoughts into human comprehensible speech. 6 months you have worked here, she said. 6 months of silence and obedience. Tell me, cleaning creature, who killed my songbird? The question was a trap. Marcus understood that immediately. There was no right answer. If he blamed someone specific, he'd be lying, and she'd know it. If he claimed ignorance, she might kill him for being useless. If he suggested natural causes, she'd execute him for questioning her judgment. I don't know, Majesty, he said quietly. But you have opinions, yes? All creatures have thoughts about the events around them. Share yours. Marcus's mind raced. She was playing with him, like a cat with a mouse. This was entertainment for her after a day of killing. Soon she'd grow bored and add his body to the pile on her throne room floor. Sometimes things die, he said finally, without reason or blame. Sometimes death just happens. The Empress leaned forward, her massive form casting a shadow over him. Ah, you believe in fate then? In forces beyond mortal control? I believe in accepting what cannot be changed while working to improve what can be. Interesting philosophy for a cleaning creature. Her claws clicked against the arm of her throne. And what would you improve about your current situation? Another trap. Criticizing anything about the palace or her rule would mean instant death, but complete satisfaction would be obviously false. Marcus chose his words carefully. I would improve my efficiency, Majesty. Every day I try to clean better and faster, to serve the Empire more effectively. Service. The word rolled off her tongue like a curse. 8 servants died today because their service was inadequate. What makes you believe yours is any better? 1. I don't believe it's better, Majesty. I simply try to do my job without causing problems. The Empress stood up, towering over him. Her 4 arms moved independently, each hand capable of ending his life in an instant. 16 servants have knelt before this throne in the past month. 16 have disappointed me with their excuses and pleas. You are the 17th. Marcus felt his heart hammering against his ribs. This was it. His time had come. But something inside him rebelled against going quietly. He thought of Yura's dignity in the face of death, of the groundskeeper's genuine love for the creatures in his care, of all the innocent beings who died today for no real reason. Kneel, the Empress commanded. Marcus looked up at her compound eyes. In their alien depths, he saw centuries of cruelty and absolute power. She expected him to collapse in terror, to beg for his life like so many others had. The pattern was always the same: command, kneel, plead, execute. No, he said quietly. The single word hung in the air like a physical thing. The Empress froze, her claws halfway extended. In the sudden silence, Marcus could hear his own breathing and the distant hum of the palace's environmental systems. What did you say? Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried deadly menace. I said no. Marcus's voice grew stronger. I won't kneel. The Empress stared at him for a long moment. Her compound eyes shifted and focused, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. In her long reign of terror, no servant had ever refused a direct command. None had ever stood straight and looked her in the eye while defying her will. You dare refuse me? Her voice rose to a shriek that echoed off the throne room walls. I am Empress Zix Thara. I rule 12 star systems. I decide who lives and who dies. I know who you are, Marcus replied, and I'm still not kneeling. The standoff stretched between them like a taut wire. The Empress's fury was so intense that the air around her seemed to shimmer with heat. Her claws extended fully, gleaming in the harsh lights. Every muscle in her massive frame was coiled to strike, but she hesitated. For the first time in her reign, someone had met her gaze without flinching. Someone had heard her commands and chosen defiance over submission. The pattern she'd followed for decades was broken, and she didn't know how to respond. Marcus felt strangely calm as he faced his death. He'd spent months watching innocent beings die for no reason other than satisfying an alien tyrant's need for absolute control. If his defiance could break that pattern, even briefly, then perhaps his death would mean something. The Empress raised her claws, preparing to strike. Then she stopped, studying his face with an expression Marcus couldn't read. In the alien features, he thought he saw something that might have been confusion, or perhaps even curiosity. Why? She asked suddenly. Why do you choose death over submission? Marcus considered the question. Why was he willing to die rather than kneel? The answer came to him as clearly as if it had been written in his heart all along. Because someone has to, he said. Someone has to say no. The Empress lowered her claws slightly. For a moment, the throne room was utterly silent except for their breathing. One human, one alien, locked in a confrontation that would change everything. The Empress circled Marcus like a predator, studying wounded prey. Her claws remained extended, gleaming under the throne room's harsh lights. But she didn't strike. For 3 full minutes, the only sound was the soft clicking of her chitinous feet against the polished floor. Guards, she called suddenly. 2 massive Vorthak soldiers entered immediately, their weapons already drawn. They'd been waiting outside, listening for screams that would signal another execution. Instead, they found their Empress pacing around a human, who remained standing. Remove this creature from my sight, she commanded. Place him in the isolation cells beneath the palace. I will decide his fate later. Marcus felt a mixture of relief and dread. He wasn't dead yet, but the isolation cells were notorious throughout the servant quarters. Beings went down there and emerged broken, if they emerged at all. Still, it was better than immediate death. The guards grabbed his arms with crushing force and dragged him from the throne room. As they passed through the massive doors, Marcus caught a glimpse of the Empress still standing among the bodies of her murdered servants. Staring at the spot where he'd defied her, the isolation cells were carved into the bedrock beneath the palace foundations. The guards threw Marcus into a cube-shaped chamber, barely large enough to lie down in. The walls were smooth black stone that absorbed light, making the space feel even smaller. A thin slot at the bottom allowed for food delivery, and a larger opening near the top provided minimal ventilation. Hours passed in complete darkness. Marcus tried to sleep but found it impossible. The encounter in the throne room replayed in his mind over and over. He'd expected to die the moment he said no. Instead, the Empress had hesitated. In her alien eyes, he'd seen something unexpected. Confusion. Maybe even uncertainty. That single moment of hesitation meant something. In all the stories told throughout the servant quarters, no one had ever seen the Empress doubt herself. She killed without mercy or thought, as naturally as breathing. But faced with simple defiance, she'd paused. Food came through the slot, a thin gruel that tasted like recycled protein. Marcus ate slowly, trying to make it last. He'd heard that prisoners in isolation sometimes went days without food as part of their psychological torture. On the second day, footsteps echoed in the corridor outside his cell. The heavy tread belonged to Vorthak guards, but lighter steps accompanied them. A human voice spoke quietly, too distant to understand the words. The cell door opened with a grinding of ancient mechanisms. Two guards entered, followed by a human woman Marcus didn't recognize. She wore the dark robes of a palace administrator, marking her as someone with actual authority among the servant hierarchy. "I am Director Hansen," she said once the guards left. "I oversee human resources for the palace." Marcus struggled to sit up in the cramped space. "I've never seen you before. I work in the administrative levels. We rarely interact with cleaning staff directly." She knelt beside him, speaking in low tones. "What you did in the throne room has caused quite a stir among the upper staff." I told her no. "That's all. That's everything." Hansen's eyes were intense. "Do you understand what you've done? In 200 years of Vorthak rule, no servant has ever refused a direct command from the Empress and lived to tell about it." Marcus leaned against the cold stone wall. "I'm not dead yet. But I'm not exactly living either." "She's been asking about you," Hansen continued. "Questioning the administrative staff about human psychology, about what drives your species to act against self-interest. She wants to understand why you chose defiance over survival." "And what did you tell her?" "The truth. That humans are unpredictable, even to ourselves. That we sometimes choose principles over preservation." Hansen paused. She didn't like that answer. They sat in silence for a moment. Above them, the palace continued its daily routines. Servants worked in fear. Nobles plotted advancement. And the Empress ruled with absolute authority. But something had changed in the foundation of that order. "There's more," Hansen said. "Your defiance has spread through the servant quarters like wildfire. Beings who've never spoken above a whisper are talking about resistance. Some of the newer arrivals from conquered worlds are starting to ask why they submit so easily to alien rule." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold cell. "That's dangerous talk. It'll get people killed." "People are already dying. 8 more servants were executed yesterday because the Empress couldn't focus on her duties. Your action triggered something in her, and she's taking it out on anyone within reach." Guilt crashed over Marcus like a wave. He'd thought his defiance might inspire others, but instead it was causing more innocent deaths. The pattern of executions was accelerating because of his choice to say no. "I need to do something," he said. "I need to stop this." "There's nothing you can do from this cell," Hansen replied. "But there might be a way to turn this situation to our advantage." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "There's a resistance network throughout the palace, small groups of servants from different species, working together to document Vorthak weaknesses and gather intelligence. We've been planning something for months, but we needed a catalyst." "What kind of catalyst?" "Proof that the Empress isn't invincible. Evidence that she can be challenged, that her power has limits." Hansen's eyes gleamed in the dim light. You provided that proof. Marcus understood immediately. His defiance hadn't just been a personal moment of rebellion. It was a crack in the foundation of absolute tyranny that had ruled the galaxy for centuries. Others could build on that crack, widen it, until the entire structure came tumbling down. What do you need from me? He asked. Survive. Whatever happens when she calls for you again, survive it. The resistance needs a symbol. Someone who stood up to the Empress and lived. Your survival gives hope to every enslaved being in the Empire. The guards returned before Hansen could say more. She was escorted away, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts. The weight of expectation pressed down on him like a physical force. He wasn't just fighting for his own life anymore. Entire worlds of enslaved beings were watching to see if defiance was possible. 2 more days passed in isolation. Marcus exercised in the cramped space, maintaining his strength for whatever was coming. He practiced conversations with the Empress, trying to find words that might break through her alien mindset without triggering immediate execution. Food deliveries became irregular, sometimes coming twice in what felt like a day, other times leaving him hungry for extended periods. This was part of the psychological pressure, designed to break down his resistance through physical discomfort and temporal disorientation. On what he estimated was the 5th day, the cell door opened again. This time, only guards entered. They hauled him upright and dragged him through the underground corridors. His legs were weak from confinement, but he forced himself to walk as much as possible. They emerged into the palace proper through a hidden entrance Marcus had never seen before. The corridors here were different from the servant areas he knew. These walls were decorated with conquests from across the galaxy. Artwork stolen from fallen civilizations, weapons taken from defeated armies, and trophies carved from the bones of extinct species. The guards brought him to a chamber he didn't recognize. It was smaller than the throne room but no less intimidating. The walls were lined with viewing screens showing different parts of the galaxy under Vorthak control, mining operations on asteroid belts, slave markets on conquered worlds, and military installations guarding strategic jump points. The Empress sat behind a massive desk carved from what looked like a single piece of black crystal. She was alone except for the guards, studying reports displayed on floating holographic screens. When Marcus was brought before her, she dismissed the soldiers with a gesture. Sit, she commanded, indicating a chair designed for humanoid physiology. Marcus remained standing. The Empress looked up from her reports, her compound eyes focusing on him with laser intensity. I said sit. I heard you. The air between them crackled with tension. The Empress's claws extended partially, then retracted. She was controlling herself, fighting the urge to execute him for continued defiance. 5 days in isolation should have broken your spirit, she said. Most creatures emerge begging for mercy, willing to do anything to avoid returning to those cells. I'm not most creatures. No, you are not. She stood up and walked around the desk. You are a puzzle human, a creature that chooses pain over submission, death over obedience. This is not logical behavior. Marcus met her gaze steadily. Logic isn't everything. In my empire, it is the only thing that matters. Order, hierarchy, absolute obedience to superior force. She gestured toward the viewing screens. This system has brought peace to 12-star systems. Billions of beings live in harmony under Vorthak rule. You call slavery harmony? I call it necessity. The Empress moved closer, towering over him. Before our empire, these systems were torn apart by constant warfare. Species fought each other for resources, territory, ideology. Billions died in meaningless conflicts. Marcus looked at the screens, showing mining operations and slave markets. And now they die in meaningful ones? Now they serve a purpose greater than themselves. Every being in my empire contributes to the greater good. There is no waste, no inefficiency, no chaos. Her voice carried absolute conviction. This is what civilization looks like. This is what tyranny looks like. The Empress's claws extended fully. For a moment, Marcus thought she would strike him down despite her apparent curiosity about his psychology. Instead, She turned away and walked to one of the viewing screens. "Look at this," she commanded, touching the screen to change the display. The new image showed a planet Marcus didn't recognize. The surface was covered with gleaming cities connected by efficient transportation networks. Parks and recreational areas were visible between residential districts. It looked peaceful, prosperous, and orderly. "Kepler 7, the Empress said. Before Vorthak rule, this world was devastated by civil war. 3 different species fighting for control, using weapons that poisoned the atmosphere and rendered vast areas uninhabitable. The display changed to show archived footage of the same planet decades earlier. Ruined cities, poisoned wastelands, and massive refugee camps filled the screen. The contrast was stark. "We conquered this world 50 years ago," the Empress continued. "We ended the Civil War, cleaned the environment, and built a functional society. The inhabitants now live longer, healthier lives than they ever did under their own government." Marcus studied the images. He couldn't deny that the current planet looked better than the war-torn version. But the cost of that improvement was visible in the rigid structure of the cities, the uniformity of the architecture, and the complete absence of anything that might indicate individual expression. "They're prisoners in a beautiful cage," he said. "They are productive citizens of a stable society." The Empress changed the display again, showing another world. Tau CT4, a mining world where the indigenous population was slowly poisoning themselves with industrial pollution. "We introduced clean extraction methods and proper environmental controls." More before and after images flashed across the screen. Polluted wastelands transformed into clean industrial complexes. Sickly inhabitants replaced by healthy workers in protective gear. "You see the pattern," the Empress said. "Wherever the Vorthak Empire extends its influence, chaos becomes order. Suffering becomes purpose. Death becomes meaningful." Marcus felt a chill of understanding. The Empress genuinely believed she was saving the galaxy through conquest. In her alien mind, slavery and oppression were necessary tools to prevent worse outcomes. She wasn't evil in the traditional sense. She was absolutely convinced of her own righteousness. "What about choice?" he asked. "What about the right to make mistakes? To fail? To find your own path?" "Choice is chaos," the Empress replied immediately. "Freedom is another word for inefficiency. I have seen what happens when beings are left to govern themselves. War, poverty, environmental destruction, and endless suffering." She gestured toward the screens again. "Under my rule, there is no war because resistance is impossible. There is no poverty because everyone has a purpose. There is no environmental destruction because all activities are carefully regulated. And no freedom. Freedom is overrated." The Empress turned back to face him. "Your own species proves this. Given the choice, humans wage war on each other, destroy their environment, and create systems of inequality that benefit few while oppressing many. We liberated your people from those failures." Marcus thought about Earth before the conquest. The Empress wasn't entirely wrong. Humanity had struggled with war, pollution, and social injustice. But they'd also created art, music, literature, and scientific discoveries that emerged from the chaos of free thought. "We also created beauty," he said. "Innovation, love, discovery. Things that only happen when minds are free to explore. Luxury," the Empress dismissed. "Unnecessary complications that distract from essential functions. They're what make life worth living." The Empress studied him with renewed interest. "Explain this concept. Worth living." "In my understanding, life's value comes from its contribution to the greater whole. Individual satisfaction is irrelevant." Unquote. Marcus searched for words that might penetrate her alien mindset. Imagine a song that no one was allowed to sing because it served no productive function. Imagine a poem that was never written because poetry was inefficient. Imagine love that was forbidden because it created emotional complications. I imagine a more orderly society. I imagine a dead one. They stood in silence for a long moment. The Empress's compound eyes shifted as she processed his words. Marcus could see her struggling with concepts that had no parallel in her hierarchical worldview. "You believe individual experience has value independent of social contribution," she said finally. "I believe individual experience is what gives social contribution meaning." The Empress walked back to her desk and sat down. Her massive form seemed smaller somehow, as if the weight of the conversation was pressing down on her. "This is why you refuse to kneel," she said. "Not from defiance, but from conviction. You genuinely believe your individual will has value greater than social order. I believe both can exist together. That real order comes from beings who choose to cooperate, not from those forced to submit." The Empress was quiet for several minutes, studying the displays that showed her vast empire. Billions of beings living orderly, productive lives under absolute control. It was impressive in its scope and efficiency. But Marcus wondered if any of them were truly alive in the way he understood the term. "I will give you a choice," the Empress said suddenly. "Return to your cleaning duties and never speak of this conversation. Continue your work in silence and obedience. I will ensure your survival and even provide better accommodations." Marcus felt a spark of hope, quickly tempered by suspicion. "And the alternative? Help me understand your species better. Work with my advisors to explain human psychology and motivation. Your insights might prove useful in governing human populations more effectively." The offer was seductive. Better living conditions, intellectual engagement, and a chance to influence how humans were treated throughout the empire. But Marcus understood the trap embedded in the choice. "You're asking me to help you control my own people more efficiently. I am asking you to help me serve them more effectively, by making their cages more comfortable." The Empress's claws clicked against the crystal desk. "By making their integration into civilized society more complete." Marcus looked at the screens, showing peaceful, orderly worlds under Vorthak control. He could see the appeal of what the Empress offered: stability, prosperity, and an end to the chaos that had plagued galactic civilization for millennia. But he could also see what was missing from those perfectly ordered societies. "There's a third option," he said. "There is no third option. You cooperate, or you return to meaningless labor." I continue saying no. The Empress's compound eyes focused on him with predatory intensity. "That choice leads only to death. Maybe. But it also leads to something you can't understand. Enlighten me." Marcus took a breath, knowing his next words would determine whether he lived or died. "It leads to the possibility that you might be wrong." The words hung in the air between them like a physical challenge. The Empress rose slowly from her crystalline desk, her massive form casting long shadows across the chamber. Her forearms moved independently, claws extending and retracting as she processed the impossible suggestion that her absolute certainty might be flawed. "Wrong?" The word came out as a grinding whisper. "I have conquered 12 star systems. I have brought order to chaos, peace to warfare, purpose to waste. How can absolute success be wrong?" Marcus stood his ground despite every instinct screaming at him to flee. "Because you've never allowed yourself to consider any other way. You've eliminated every alternative, every voice of dissent, every possibility that doesn't fit your vision." The Empress began pacing around him again. But this time, her movement seemed less predatory and more agitated. "I have studied the histories of every conquered world. I have seen the failures of their governments, the waste of their resources, the suffering of their people. My methods produce superior results. Superior by whose measure? By every objective standard. Longer lifespans, higher productivity, reduced conflict, efficient resource allocation." The Empress gestured toward the viewing screens. "The evidence is undeniable." Marcus looked at the displays showing orderly worlds under Vorthak control. "Those are important measurements. But they're not the only ones that matter. Name one metric of civilization that is more important than the reduction of suffering." "The presence of joy." The Empress stopped pacing. Her compound eyes focused on Marcus with laser intensity. "Elaborate." "Suffering is important to reduce. But eliminating suffering doesn't automatically create a good life. You need something positive to replace it." Marcus searched for words that might penetrate her alien mindset. A person can be fed, housed, healthy, and safe, while still being completely miserable. Misery is inefficient. Unhappy workers are less productive. Exactly. So you need to understand what makes beings truly happy, not just what keeps them alive and functional. The Empress resumed her pacing, but slower now, as if the conversation required more of her attention. Happiness is temporary. Emotional states fluctuate based on circumstances. Purpose is permanent. Purpose assigned by someone else isn't the same as purpose discovered by yourself. Marcus could see her struggling with the concept. In the Vorthak hierarchy, purpose flowed downward from superior to subordinate. The idea that beings might need to find their own meaning was as foreign to her as telepathy would be to him. You suggest that beings should determine their own functions within society? She asked. I suggest that beings should have some say in what their functions are. Even within your efficient system, people could have choices about how to contribute. Choice creates inefficiency. If every being pursues their preferred function, society becomes unbalanced. Too many artists, not enough farmers. Too many explorers, not enough maintenance workers. Marcus smiled slightly. That's actually not true. Most beings want to do something useful, something that helps their community. The problem comes when you force people into roles they hate. The Empress stopped pacing and fixed him with her full attention. Explain. A farmer who chooses farming will work harder and more creatively than one forced into agriculture. They'll innovate, experiment, find better methods. A forced farmer just goes through the motions. Our productivity measurements do not support this theory. Your productivity measurements compare forced labor to no labor. They don't compare forced labor to willing cooperation. The Empress walked to her desk and activated several new displays. Data streams flowed across the screens, showing production figures from various worlds. She studied the information with intense concentration. Kepler 7, she said after several minutes. Agricultural productivity increased 340% after conquest. What was agricultural productivity before the Civil War that destroyed their society? The Empress paused. More data flowed across the screens as she searched historical records. When she found the information, her expression shifted subtly. Agricultural productivity during their peaceful periods was 280% of current levels, she admitted. So your conquest made their agriculture less efficient than it had been when they governed themselves. The Civil War destroyed their infrastructure. We rebuilt it more efficiently. Quote, but not as efficiently as they had built it originally. Marcus pressed his advantage. What if instead of conquering them, you had helped end the Civil War and assisted with rebuilding? They might have achieved even higher productivity while maintaining their freedom. The Empress brought up data from other worlds. Each search revealed similar patterns. Vorthak efficiency was impressive compared to war-torn or collapsed civilizations, but inferior to those same civilizations during their periods of self-governance and prosperity. This data is incomplete, the Empress said, but her voice lacked its usual certainty. It does not account for the inevitable resumption of conflict that would have occurred without our intervention. How do you know conflict was inevitable? Because it is the natural state of ungoverned beings. Without hierarchy and absolute authority, chaos always returns. Marcus saw the core of her worldview now. The Empress wasn't just convinced that tyranny was more efficient than freedom. She believed that freedom inevitably led to destruction, making tyranny not just preferable, but necessary for survival. What if you're wrong about that? He asked gently. I cannot be wrong. I have observed the pattern across dozens of worlds. Over 2 centuries of expansion, you've observed the pattern among worlds that were already failing when you conquered them. That's selection bias. The Empress's claws clicked against her desk. Explain this concept. You only conquer worlds that are weak enough for you to defeat. Strong, stable, peaceful civilizations would be able to resist your invasion. So, of course, every world you've conquered shows signs of chaos and failure. That's what made them vulnerable in the first place. The logic hit the Empress like a physical blow. Marcus could see her mind working, processing the implications. Her entire philosophy of governance was based on evidence gathered exclusively from failed states and collapsing civilizations. But even successful civilizations eventually fail, she said. History shows that all societies collapse given enough time, and then new ones rise to take their place. Sometimes better ones, sometimes worse, but always different. That's how progress happens. Progress is inefficient. Change introduces variables that disrupt optimal functioning. Change also introduces improvements that enhance optimal functioning. The Empress sat down heavily at her desk. For the first time since Marcus had known her, she looked uncertain. The absolute confidence that had driven her empire was cracking under the weight of ideas she'd never allowed herself to consider. "You are suggesting that I have built my empire on fundamentally flawed assumptions," she said slowly. "I'm suggesting that maybe your assumptions were based on incomplete information." The chamber fell silent, except for the hum of the viewing screens. The Empress stared at the displays, showing her vast domain. But Marcus could see her perception of those images changing. What had seemed like obvious proof of her success now looked more ambiguous. "If you are correct," she said finally, "then I am responsible for the suffering of billions of beings who might have found happiness under different circumstances." Marcus felt a moment of sympathy for the alien ruler. She'd built her entire identity around the belief that her actions were necessary and beneficial. Confronting the possibility that she might be wrong was devastating in a way he could barely imagine. "You're also responsible for saving billions of beings who would have died in wars and disasters," he said. "The situation isn't simple. You did prevent a lot of suffering, even if you also caused other kinds of harm." The Empress looked up at him with something that might have been gratitude. "You offer absolution I do not deserve." "I'm not offering absolution. I'm offering perspective." She stood and walked to one of the viewing screens, touching it to display a new image. This one showed Earth, as it existed now under Vorthak rule. Clean cities, organized agriculture, and humans working efficiently in various industries. "Your world," she said. "Before our arrival, your people faced environmental collapse, resource depletion, and escalating conflicts over diminishing supplies. We prevented that catastrophe." Marcus looked at the image of his transformed homeworld. The Empress was right. Humanity had been heading toward disaster. Climate change, overpopulation, and political divisions had created an unsustainable situation. "We might have solved those problems ourselves," he said, "given time. Time you did not have. Our projections indicated total societal collapse within 50 Earth years. Your projections were based on the assumption that we wouldn't change, wouldn't adapt, wouldn't learn from our mistakes. Historical evidence suggested that assumption was correct." Marcus thought about humanity's history of overcoming seemingly impossible challenges. Historical evidence also shows that humans are remarkably good at pulling back from the brink at the last moment. "We've done it before." The Empress switched the display again, showing archives of human warfare, environmental destruction, and social inequality. These images show centuries of repeated failure to learn from mistakes. They also show centuries of gradual improvement. Slavery was once universal among human societies. Then it was gradually eliminated. Wars became less frequent and less destructive over time. Environmental awareness grew from nothing to a global movement. Too slowly. The pace of improvement was insufficient to prevent collapse. Maybe we would have found a way, like we always had before. The Empress turned away from the screens to face him directly. "Even if you are correct, even if humanity might have solved its problems independently, the uncertainty was too great to risk. The potential cost of failure was the extinction of your entire species. The cost of your intervention was the extinction of our freedom. Freedom to fail is not a meaningful choice. Freedom to fail is the only freedom that matters." They stared at each other across a gulf of incompatible philosophies. The Empress valued security, order, and guaranteed outcomes. Marcus valued autonomy, choice, and the right to take risks. Neither could fully understand the other's perspective, but for the first time, both were trying. "I cannot undo what has been done," the Empress said finally. 12 star systems and billions of beings now depend on the stability my empire provides. Even if I wanted to grant them freedom, the sudden collapse of established order would cause massive suffering. Marcus nodded slowly. I understand. You're trapped by your own success. The system is so large that dismantling it would be as catastrophic as the problems it originally solved. But perhaps, the Empress continued, there might be ways to introduce elements of choice within the existing structure, methods to allow beings some autonomy while maintaining essential stability. Hope flared in Marcus's chest. You mean reforms? Gradual changes toward greater freedom? I mean experiments. Careful modifications to test whether your theories about voluntary cooperation have merit. The Empress returned to her desk and activated new displays. Small pilot programs on isolated worlds, limited autonomy in non-essential sectors, monitored introduction of choice in personal matters. Marcus watched as she began pulling up data on various worlds and populations. Her alien mind was already working on the practical details of implementing ideas that had seemed impossible just hours earlier. What would you need from me? He asked. Your perspective on human psychology and motivation. Your insights into how freedom-based systems might function within an ordered framework. The Empress paused. And your continued defiance. What do you mean? If I am to question my own assumptions, I need advisors who will challenge my thinking. Yes-men and sycophants created the blind spots that led to this conversation. I require individuals who will say no when my ideas are flawed. Marcus understood the incredible significance of what she was offering. A position as advisor to the Empress of a galactic empire, with the specific mandate to oppose her when necessary. It was beyond anything he could have imagined when this conversation began. And if I refuse? If I choose to return to cleaning floors instead of helping reform your empire? The Empress's compound eyes glittered with something that might have been amusement. Then you will clean floors in a galaxy that slowly changes around you, becoming more free with each passing year, as I implement these reforms without your input. So either way, things improve. Either way, things change. Whether they improve depends on how well we navigate the transition. Marcus looked at the viewing screens showing the vast Vorthak Empire. Billions of beings lived under its rule, most of them resigned to their fate. The possibility of giving them hope, of creating pathways toward greater freedom, was irresistible. I'll help, he said. But I have conditions. The Empress leaned back in her chair. Name them. No more arbitrary executions. If you're going to test theories about voluntary cooperation, you need to stop ruling through terror. Agreed. What else? Start the reforms with Earth. If this is going to work anywhere, it should work with my own people first. Logical. Additional conditions? Marcus thought for a moment. Include other species in the planning process. Humans aren't the only ones who value freedom. Get perspectives from across your empire. Acceptable. Is that all? One more thing. If these experiments fail, if voluntary cooperation doesn't work, I want you to promise you'll consider other approaches instead of just returning to pure tyranny. The Empress was quiet for a long moment. You ask me to abandon the only system I know to be effective. I ask you to keep searching for better systems, even if the first alternatives don't work. Very well. I promise to continue seeking improvements even if initial reforms prove unsuccessful. Marcus felt the weight of the moment settle over him. A conversation that began with a simple refusal to kneel had become the foundation for potentially transforming a galactic empire. The human who had once been invisible while cleaning floors was now being invited to help reshape the fate of billions. When do we start? He asked. The Empress touched her desk, activating communication systems that connected her to administrators throughout the empire. Immediately. There is much work to do, and I find myself eager to discover whether my certainty was wisdom or blindness. As messages began flowing between the Imperial Palace and distant worlds, Marcus thought about the servant quarters where his fellow humans were probably wondering what had happened to the custodian who had simply disappeared 5 days earlier. Soon they would learn that sometimes saying no could change everything. The first reports from Earth arrived within hours. Human administrators, given sudden authority to propose reforms in their sectors, responded with enthusiasm and detailed plans. Other species throughout the empire began receiving similar opportunities as word spread through the imperial bureaucracy. Marcus watched the cascade of changes beginning across 12 star systems. It wouldn't be easy, and many of the experiments would probably fail, but for the first time in 2 centuries, beings throughout the Vorthak Empire had reason to hope that tomorrow might be different from today. The Empress observed the early responses with intense interest. "Remarkable," she said as reports flowed in from across the galaxy. "The speed and creativity of these proposals suggests significant pent-up desire for change. People have been thinking about this for a long time," Marcus replied. "They just never had permission to speak up before." Permission. The Empress tested the word, as if it were foreign to her. "I am beginning to understand why you chose defiance over submission. You were not refusing my authority. You were asserting your own." Marcus nodded. "That's all any of us really want. Not to tear down what you've built, but to have some say in how we fit into it." The screens around them continued displaying reports from across the empire. Each message represented thousands or millions of beings who were suddenly allowed to imagine different futures for themselves. The transformation was just beginning, but it was already unstoppable. "I believe," said the Empress, "that this conversation will be remembered as the moment when the Vorthok Empire began to become something greater than itself." Marcus smiled, thinking of all the servants who had died simply for displeasing their alien ruler, and all the beings throughout the galaxy who would now have the chance to live rather than merely survive. "I believe you're right," he said. "Sometimes the smallest act of defiance can change everything." Outside the chamber, across 12 star systems and billions of worlds, the future began to unfold in ways neither human nor alien could have predicted. The custodian who had refused to kneel had set in motion forces that would reshape galactic civilization itself, and it had all started with a single word: no.